F1 on 5 Live.
F1 arrives back in Europe, in Spain, at a track that every team and driver know pretty well. It's the Circuit de Barcelona Catalunya, and after free practice 1 earlier today, it was Lando Norris and McLaren who were fastest, ahead of Max Verstappen and home hero Carlos Sainz. Upgrades galore, big questions on and off the track still to be answered. There's a lot of excitement up and down the paddock as we embark on the beginning of an intense month of Formula One. 3 races coming up, back to back to back. And, one more live session coming your way this afternoon in just a few moments' time for free practice 2. My name's Harry Benjamin. Guiding you through all the coverage alongside myself is former F1 mechanic Mark Priestley and BBC F1 correspondent Andrew Benson. Mark, we've had one session. Lando topped it. Did we learn much more?
Did we learn much? I think the teams will have learnt a lot. There's a lot of new upgrades on a lot of different cars this weekend, and FP1 for the teams is all about getting that first impression of how the car feels now under those new conditions. They'll have collected a huge amount of data. We saw a lot of people running around with those enormous big aero rakes full of sensors just to measure exactly how the air's flowing over the car. So that data will have all been crunched, talked about, drivers debriefed. FP2 is really where we're going to see the fruits of that. So now they've had the opportunity to make changes in terms of the setup. The drivers will go out with a different frame of mind about how they get the best out of this new package. So FP2 is going to be the biggest indicator, particularly towards the end, where we get both the long runs in the early part of the session, and then towards the end or earlier on, we're going to get these qualifying runs, if you like, where everybody goes on low fuel. They're going to go on the soft tyres, and we're going to get a real indicator of just how fast everybody is over a single lap, and that will be fascinating.
It certainly will be. Andrew, everybody has been sort of building up this weekend as a bit of an acid test almost for the likes of Red Bull. Will we get a true read on the competitive order, considering we come off the back of a couple of races now where it hasn't seemed like Red Bull and Verstappen have been the dominant force they have been up until now? But why is it this track is going to be the test for that?
Well, it kind of depends on your perspective, Harry. Barcelona was always considered as the track that was the sort of arbiter of the qualities of a Formula One car, because it had a good mix of corners. Many of them were long, so it was a challenge to the car's aerodynamic stability and efficiency, basically. But the problem is that now the pattern of circuits across the Formula One calendar has changed, and the drivers were saying yesterday, particularly Carlos Sainz and Fernando Alonso, that actually there's now a lot of street circuits, a lot of tracks with short duration corners, slower corners. So actually Barcelona's not a particularly good arbiter of the entire season. And in any case, what is an entire season? Because the teams are upgrading their cars pretty much constantly all the time these days anyway. But what I think it will be is an indicator of the next few races, because Spain, Austria and Silverstone follow in quick succession over the next 3 weekends. There's a week gap, then Hungary and Spa on consecutive weekends. All of those tracks are like classic European road courses. Obviously not all the same speed, but similar corner characteristics, long corners, challenging circuits. And so I think a car that goes well here could go well on all of those tracks. So I think if Verstappen dominates this weekend, then we might be in for a bit of a rough ride over the next 4 or 5 races. If it's close this weekend, that's a good sign for a competitive run up to the summer break.
Well, he ended FP1 in second spot, but still a lot more to be learnt, which we'll get some more answers to in a few moments' time when free practice 2 gets underway. Sunshine out, beautiful conditions, blue sky, white puffy clouds, and the grandstands, even the grassy verges where you can watch from around the track, are absolutely packed full. Air temperature just under 25 degrees, track temperature around 44 degrees, and can bring you up to speed with how the drivers and constructors' points lie ahead of what is the 10th round of this, the longest ever season in Formula One. And it's Max Verstappen who leads the Drivers' Championship by 56 points. He's on 194. Charles Leclerc in second. He's only 7, though, ahead of Lando Norris in third. Carlos Sainz in fourth. Remember, both Ferraris failed to score last time out in Canada. Sergio Perez drops down to 5th in the Drivers' Championship. And then over in from the constructors, it's Red Bull who lead the way with 301 points. They are 49 ahead of Ferrari. Then it's McLaren, Mercedes, Aston Martin, the top 5. And then it's RB who head up the second tier of the constructors standings, with Haas in 7th, Alpine with a double points finish in Canada last time out, leapfrog Williams for 8th, then Sauber are 10th and last. The only team yet to get off the mark this season, with Valtteri Bottas and Zhou Guanyu still on 0 points each. Okay, well, I think we're getting green light on at the end of the pit lane, and we are ready to get free practice 2 started, and straight away cars heading out on track. Hamilton, Bottas, Norris all straight out, and for those who wish to do a sync up, it's 59 minutes and 23 seconds remain of this session. And this is a track, though, that certainly has certainly a mix of corners, and certainly a track that favours the likes of Lewis Hamilton, 6-time winner here. Do you think he'll be carrying, Mark, quite a lot of momentum with the way he is, even though it was George Russell who had the better of him and has had the better of him so far this season? With this new front wing, a new package almost on that Mercedes, they seem to have been building towards a good place at a track he seemingly quite likes. Do you think this could be a place for Hamilton to show his hand a bit more?
I think the Mercedes team in general were definitely buoyed after what was actually a pretty strong performance out in Montreal last time out. They seem to have understood something about their car, whether it is through that front wing or other elements of data that are coming out the factory. They're getting an understanding for the direction in which they need to go in terms of its development. And that's really where they've been lost up until now. They've been scratching around, going in all sorts of directions, none of which have really worked for them. They seem to now think they have nailed that, or at least they understand that, and so now they've got a direction, and that's the most important thing. So there were times during the Montreal weekend when Mercedes literally had the quickest car of anybody in certain phases, and they'll take heart from that. So this is going to be a really interesting test. It's a very much a track, as Andrew said, that rewards aerodynamic efficiency. There's a lot of high-speed, long-duration corners where you're relying on the car's aerodynamics to generate the grip. So every team is going to be trying to understand exactly how their package, which is a completely different package, by the way, to the one that we saw over the last couple of rounds, different type of circuit. So they're all looking during this session to find out how that sits. And I think Lewis Hamilton has been slightly overshadowed by his teammate George Russell, hasn't he, in recent times. He will want, from his own perspective, he was even quite self-critical of his own performance coming off the back of Canada. I think from his own perspective, he wants to put that to bed and show himself, not just the world, but to show himself what he's still capable of doing. So I think we're going to see a Lewis Hamilton try and bounce back. Whether he can do it or not, well, only time will tell.
What I found really interesting as well in the build-up to this weekend, James Allison, the team's chief technical officer, was saying on a podcast interview, how could we have been so dumb in response to seemingly finding and unlocking the potential that they believe has been in this car since the beginning of the season. Now with the addition of this new front wing and the other elements that they've brought to the car, as Hamilton sets the fastest lap time of the session so far with a 1:15.0. I found it quite funny how someone like James Allison, Andrew, is saying, how could we have been so dumb and missed it? But in a sport that is full of complexities, even one of the very best teams has struggled quite publicly and had a few false dawns. Does this, and him saying that, signal that actually this is the proper start of something now? They've found their way forward.
Well, I think we're going to find out, aren't we, over the next few races? But I spoke to James Allison about this at quite some length, actually, a couple of races ago in Monaco. And what he was basically saying was, I was asking, why didn't you understand these regulations? And he said, well, it's a bigger question than that. It's about what you define as the important characteristics of your car. What are you looking for, basically? Of course I can tell you that if the car if it's got more downforce, if it's more efficient, if it uses its tyres more effectively, it'll go faster. But it's about what things you do in your engineering that you're looking for to make those things happen. And he was saying that these cars, since the rule change that was introduced in 2022, they require a different and more complex set of analyses to get to those answers. and that they were too long locked into their old way of working, which had worked for them for so well, obviously, for 8 consecutive Constructors' World Championships. And why wouldn't they be locked into that, given it had been so successful? And it took them too long to realise that that was not what they needed to do anymore. They needed to look at the Formula One car's performance and what they needed to get from it in a different way. And it seems like it's taken them pretty much the best part of 2 years, if not a bit more, to get to that point. And he now believes that they are at that point. But of course, James Allison's not the sort of person who'll say that he's confident about anything, that they're going to be on the right track or become competitive. But he was certainly more certain in that conversation that they were now in a place where they could expect to move forward in a more consistent way than they have done for the last 2 years.
And we want them back in the fight, don't we? We want more teams in that fight, so it's only a good thing. Pretty much everybody out on track at the moment, with the exception of Lewis Hamilton, who has just come into the pits as Pierre Gasly just comes out of the pits on an outlap. This track, just over 4.6 kilometres, 2.8 miles, 9 corners to the right, 8 corners to the right, 6 to the left, and with 54 minutes and 5, 4, 3 seconds remaining. It's Lando Norris who is currently fastest to 1:14.1. Of course, Mark, that Mercedes team has also got a big gap to fill in one of their cars for next season. Lewis Hamilton, as we all know, will be heading off to Ferrari next year. And what I found interesting in the last week or so, this coming from the FIA, that they have now lowered the super license age. They're going to they will allow, in exceptional circumstances, drivers to get a super license if they are, at the moment, the age limit is 18. And that was brought in because of Max Verstappen. So this all, and everyone is basically thinking that this all stems from Mercedes want Kimi Antonelli, who is 17 years old, in the car. But to me, he turns 18 in August. So to me, this seems to indicate they want him, maybe, in a Williams before the end of the year. Could you see that?
I think, look, the internet's going crazy for this, because that is...
And I'm lapping every single minute of that.
If you're going to put the pieces together and come up with a reason for it, that looks like it could be it. Obviously at Williams, we know they've got one driver that's hugely underperforming, but does it really make any sense? We think Kimi Antonelli will end up in the Mercedes, in Lewis Hamilton's old seat for 2025. That's looking more and more likely. Do they want to run him in a Williams for the rest of the season, over the course of this season? Don't forget, Logan Sargent in that Williams has a contract. We think he's paying a reasonable amount of money to be in that car. I'm not sure they're necessarily going to get rid of him at this point. But it does open up that possibility. So the age limit doesn't change. It just gives the FIA the option to, in exceptional circumstances, make a change. So
I got blocked there in the end. Yeah, I saw that.
It's Valtteri Bottas getting blocked by somebody else on track. I think the interesting thing, I think it's a sensible change, first of all, because it's only in exceptional circumstances, and if there are exceptional circumstances, why don't we want to see these guys coming into the sport? So that's a positive. As for Kimi Antonelli, I don't know whether he'll end up in a car at some point this year, but I think at the very least we'll see him in practice sessions, like we saw Ollie Behrman take the seat for the Haas this morning, and even for that you need the super licence. So I think that's where the possibilities open up.
So this rule, it's one of those classic examples in Formula One of a rule that was introduced for the wrong reasons because of the wrong circumstances. It happened because of Max Verstappen, who came into Formula One age 17, and everyone thought, oh, it's too young, and we need to put in a new rule in the super license regulations to stop people that young getting into Formula One. But the irony was that he'd proved he was more than capable of getting straight in the car and being competitive at the age of 17. So it's like, where does the logic come in a situation like that? And, something similar, if I remember rightly, Mark, happened with Kimi Raikkonen, didn't it, back in 2001, when Max Mosley, the then FIA president, made a bit of a bottom of himself, I have to say, when he was commenting through the winter before Raikkonen's debut. Oh, he's only done Formula Renault, it's not good enough, how can he possibly be ready for Formula One? And of course Raikkonen came in and he was more than ready for Formula One, even though he had only done Formula Renault. They should have, it doesn't make any sense in the context of having a 17-year-old who could drive a Formula One car competitively, to then put in a rule to stop a 17-year-old then going to try and do that.
No, I think the only example I could think of where you do need some safeguarding like that is in the exceptional circumstances of, let's say, a very wealthy paying driver who, a scenario where a dad wants to put his 16-year-old kid in Formula One as a plaything, but is very much not ready. We do need to protect against that. But if a team in Formula One is judging a 17-year-old driver based on merit, I mean, very few Formula One teams are going to bet their future and their success on a kid they don't think is ready. So let's let the teams make that call.
Okay, how's the balance, please, Max?
Car's limitless. The exits, still this weird understeer mid-corner. This car doesn't bite.
Understood.
So Max Verstappen on the radio there with understeer problems and reporting back how the balance of the car is feeling. Of course, Max Verstappen, the driver that kick-started all of this, 18 years, 228 days old. Yeah, that works. He won the Spanish Grand Prix on debut for Red Bull. What this spells to me, though, is surely if a driver is capable and good enough, then a team should be able to have them in Formula One. But as well as age, to me it also sparks a wider issue with the way kind of super license points are given out as well. Because I can't remember if it was last year or the year before, you had the likes of Colton Herta, the IndyCar driver, who was in for a run-in, possibly with AlphaTauri, RB, whatever it was called back then, and didn't have enough points, but had clearly showcased in IndyCar, which is America's top-tier single-seater category, that he could perform.
Yeah.
But when you look at the super license points awarded, IndyCar gets less than Formula 2. If you finish third in Formula 2, you get 40 points. If you finish third in IndyCar, you get 20.
The cynic might say the FIA sanctioned championships are weighted far more heavily to possibly encourage people to find a route to Formula One through their own championships.
They basically admitted that when the Colton Herta thing was going on.
Not just the cynics then.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly what the team said. That's what it's about. It's about the FIA protecting, ring fencing their own championships, and of course it's wrong. On a global level, but of course from the FIA's point of view, equally you can see it. I think what's interesting about, we kind of stray way off the point here, because Colton Herta is not on the horizon or agenda for anybody in Formula 1 at the moment, and the reason is because he's not actually doing that well in IndyCar even. Yeah,
arguably his stock has gone down from when he was first being touted.
Yeah, but it is, on a general point, obviously if you're capable of being competitive in IndyCar, you're certainly capable enough of a driver to get into a Formula 1 car and not embarrass yourself. You might not be a front-running F1 driver, but you're going to be fine. So just to have any kind of blocks in that, it is a bit silly. But then Formula 1's full of these, arcane situations that it creates for itself. And you can pick, there's a whole bunch of them in a whole different bunch of scenarios where you could have a similar sort of conversation.
Yeah, it's you get the most super license points if you're in Formula 2. That is IndyCar. Then Formula 3 is the next rung down in terms of points awarded for super licenses. But it's the fact that in the last couple of seasons, IndyCar has almost become a little bit of Formula 2 has almost become a bit of a support category for IndyCar. We've seen the likes of Marcus Armstrong, Callum Ilott from Formula 2 not getting the F1 opportunity and going off to IndyCar.
Okay, all boxes lap, please, Max.
I think support category is perhaps the wrong way of putting it.
A feeder
category only for people who've been chucked out the other end of Formula 1 because they've been found out, basically, or the teams haven't wanted them anymore. So Marcus Ericsson would be a case in point. He got absolutely trousered by Charles Leclerc at Sauber, and that was the end of his Formula 1 career. And he went to IndyCar and was quite competitive.
Won the Indy 500.
Yeah, but he got trousered by Charles Leclerc. That fact doesn't change, does it?
Trousered is a great way to describe it. Love that.
We've got George Russell fastest at the moment, by the way, by just over a tenth of a second from Lando Norris and Lewis Hamilton third. And I just wanted to go back to that Mercedes thing, so I'm going to read out the James Allison comments that I got from him, and it'd be interesting to hear what Mark thinks about this. But he said, we were slow to recognise the fact that the new regulations require a different set of skills and a different way of interacting with each other. And when I talk about interacting, I mean the main blocks of the company, so the aerodynamic guys with the vehicle dynamics guys, with the track guys, with the drawing office guys. They all have to interact because you couldn't do a Formula 1 car without it. But the extent to which they need to be in each other's pockets with these new rules is quite different to the extent to which they had to be previously, driven largely by the fact that the cars are so near the ground that the suspension and aerodynamics are closer than blood brothers to one another and need to be designed with the greatest of sympathy to each other. And we carried on for far too long with the more relaxed interactions that had served us brilliantly well under the old set of rules, and was slow to recognise the need to tighten our act up.
I think that is fascinating. It's partly fascinating because I'm writing a book at the moment, and I've just been writing about that very topic, about the interaction between departments and all parts of an organisation. I think Formula One has changed dramatically. It started with the hybrid era, so you can look at Mercedes' own success. A lot of that came from the fact that the engine or the power unit and the chassis were very much designed together. Two halves of that organisation came together, worked so well, and stole a march over almost everybody else. And that's a trend that's continued to become more and more important. You've got 1,000 or more people in a Formula One team, all of whom are brilliant at what they do. If you don't tap into all of that and employ the skills and experience of all of those people, you simply cannot be the best at what you do. And I think with this latest generation of cars, where we've taken another step forward towards the sort of underfloor aerodynamics becoming even more important, exactly as James described there, it's no longer an aerodynamic challenge plus a sort of suspension dynamic challenge. It's one challenge that both parties have to contribute to.
Well, Russell on track at the moment, absolutely wringing the neck of his Mercedes through the middle sector. Lost a bit of time in doing so. Indeed, had a big snap at one point, and that kind of put pay to the lap time. Couple of seconds down. He was fastest of anybody in the first sector up until then. It is Russell fastest with a 1:14.0. 10th clear of Norris. Hamilton, Verstappen and Sainz is 5th. Then it's Leclerc, Ocon, Piastri, Gasly and Bottas, the top 10. Magnussen's 11th ahead of Sergio Perez. Then it is Stroll, Tsunoda, Hülkenberg in 15th, Ricciardo, Alonso, Joe, Albon and Sargent. And this is the sound of George Russell just getting a big snap on the rear as he made his way up through turn 8 and then through the long, fast right-hander of turn 9, just losing the rear before he flicks the switch to had the DRS open, so that cost him quite a bit of time in the middle sector.
I'll tell you what was quite interesting about that run, though, is that he was on his 9th lap on this set of medium tyres that he's on, and the first sector he did a purple sector time, so his fastest of all. So the medium tyres seem to be hanging on reasonably well. And you were saying earlier, Harry, that it's the 3 hardest compounds this weekend in Spain. That's because these long, medium and high-speed corners put lots of lateral load through the tyres, and the softer compounds just wouldn't really be able to cope with them so effectively.
Yeah, it's a really high-speed circuit, flowing tough on the driver's neck and body because of the long corners that it's made up of, particularly through turns 3, coming into the braking zone of 4, and then you go a little bit further round through that the fast right-hander of turn 9, which leads you onto that short back straight where you get the other DRS zone. And now, since they removed the chicane on the final corner, the run through 13, then 14, the right-hander that sees off a lap of the Circuit de Barcelona, Catalunya. All quiet out on track at the moment. Everybody's in the pits. Oh no, Logan Sargent is coming out in the Williams to try and get a bit more data under his belt. He's coming out on the soft compound of tyre. Now, I know it's a good point to talk about Sargent, actually, because we do obviously, the performance deficit is there to Alex Albon. But even Albon has been saying in recent interviews that it's not always fair to judge it based on that because they haven't had the same spec of car. Albon has had the upgrades.
He's being nice, and I'm going to be really blunt here to say that Sargent is not going to be in that car next year. He's not good enough to be in that car. And if Williams have any hopes of moving up the grid, and they do, they're building something at Williams in the background. There's a lot of things being put in place. They need 2 drivers that are able to carry the performance they're trying to deliver to the car. They need to be able to carry that forward. And Sargent at the moment, repeatedly, has not been able to do that.
Yeah, it's very clear from the messaging from Williams. I think at the moment that they're not going to keep him. I think it's actually surprising in a way that they kept him for this year. They found themselves in a bit of a difficult situation where there were other alternatives. They were thinking about Liam Lawson at one point, for example, but they didn't really want to get into a whole negotiation with Red Bull about that because he's the reserve driver at the RB team at the moment. it would have been a bit complicated for them. But I think there were questions as to whether Logan Sargeant was ever really meriting a Formula One graduation from Formula 2. He did okay in Formula 2. I can't remember where he finished, 4th or 5th, was it, in 2022. You know, it was solid,
4th.
But you know, he had to. It was the very last race where he had to get the super license points to allow himself to get into the Williams, and he's obviously paying for that drive, but he's proven time and time again, and he's not really at Formula One standard, and his time is coming to an end. I actually think that it's quite likely that he will be dropped before the end of the year. I don't think it's definite yet, but it would be once Williams confirm their second driver alongside Albon for next year. Whoever that's going to be, whether it's going to be Carlos Sainz or one of the Ocon, Bottas, Gasly gang, then I think there's no reason for them to keep Sargeant in the car anymore. And I think Mercedes would, obviously, the longer it goes on, the smaller the amount of money someone would have to compensate Williams for losing Sargeant if he stops paying for his drive. And I'm sure Mercedes might think it was money well invested if, for example, here's Piastri's radio.
Oscar, we're boxed this lap. We've got a data issue, so we're boxed this lap back in the garage.
Copy, box.
So some kind of technical issue for Oscar Piastri. Had only just gone out, I think. I'm not even sure. That might have been a delayed transmission. Anyway, it would be appealing for Mercedes to get Antonelli more mileage in a race situation if he's going to be in the Mercedes car next year alongside George Russell, which it looks very likely like he's going to be, because basically, although Toto Wolff won't confirm it, if they don't take Antonelli, who are they going to take at the moment? They were kind of running out of options.
I mean, it is the sensible choice if it comes to it, isn't it, Mark? But in Logan Sargeant's side of the garage, for those working on the car, you know, where's their mindset at? Do they can they put all that aside and just go, he's our driver, this is our man, we're behind him 100%? Or does that kind of pressure on the driver have a ripple effect on those that work on that car?
I think, you know, you have to put it to one side, and you have to, and they will be just doing their best, clearly. But the bigger problem is actually the sort of the motivation and the kind of enjoyment you get from a race weekend, because they're going into that weekend, the people on Logan's side of the garage, effectively just hoping not to have another massive crash. I mean, that's about as good as they can hope for, because a massive crash translates into massive amounts of work. There's no way they're sort of stretching their, you know, hopes to the likelihood of getting a result. They're looking to not have a terrible weekend, and that's an awful way to go racing from everybody, not just the people in the garage working on his car, but the hundreds and hundreds back at base who've put all sorts of time and energy into trying to give them the best opportunity possible. It's just not a situation that any Formula One team needs to be in. It's not what Formula One's about. I don't think any team on the grid should ever be just going into a race weekend hoping not to have a disaster.
Well, Sargeant went 7th on the soft compound tyre, about 9/10 of George Russell's fastest time on the medians. Hashtag BBC F1, we'd love to hear from you. Nulla has said, I'm expecting them to let Sargeant do these next 3 races and replace him over the summer break. If he can win the next 3, he might keep the seat, I suppose. Well, Williams have won around this track before. In fact, it was their last win. If you cast your minds back to Pastor Maldonado in 2012.
If he wins the next 3 races, I'll pay for his seat.
Yeah. You're on the big dollar.
You're earning too much money from we the dealers, mate, I can tell you.
God, no self-promo on this channel. 36 minutes and 22.
Other second-hand car restoration shows are available.
36 minutes and 15, 14, 13 seconds remain of free practice 2. You're listening to 5 Live's coverage of Formula 1 with myself, Harry Benjamin, the former F1 mechanic Mark Priestley, and the BBC's F1 correspondent Andrew Benson. And don't forget, you can now listen to our F1 coverage on your smart speaker. All you have to do is ask BBC Sounds to play Spanish Grand Prix Practice 2, and then we'll pop up on your smart speaker.
As long as you speak very slowly and clearly.
Yeah. And I'm not allowed to say any particular smart speaker because it may set it all off. So if you're in your kitchen, if you're in your living room, ask BBC Sounds to play Spanish Grand Prix Practice 2 if you want it on your smart speaker of choice.
How about this? My son has just got himself a new girlfriend whose name is the same name as a popular smart speaker.
No way!
Imagine the disasters we can have at
home. Sainz has just gone fastest, a 1:13.2. He's stuck on the soft compound tyre, so too is Albon. Sargent already has done so we're now seeing cars starting to come out of the pits and do some quali simulations in this free practice 2, and we'll try and keep an eye on how they stack up before the end of the session. Carlos Sainz on home soil, never had a podium around this track, never had a podium on home soil. Might be his last chance to do so for a couple of years if he heads to a Sauber, Audi or a Williams next year. Can't see them challenging for podiums straight away.
Yeah, that's right. And for a driver, I think, who's got to this level in his career, he's had a great opportunity at McLaren, he's had a great opportunity for he's won races. To know that there might be a drought coming, no matter which of his options he chooses next year, must be quite a difficult mindset, to head into. He hopes, of course, from 2026 that, any one of those teams could end up being back to the front, but for 25 he's almost certainly heading into a car that's going to be slower than the one he's in right now. So you're right, these are moments, every one of the races that comes for the rest of this season, they're moments where he's really got an opportunity and he wants to take that to shine. But this is an exciting time of the session, I think. Everyone's starting to bolt on the soft tyres and go for those quali runs, and this is where we're going to really see just the outright performance. Who can literally go quickest around this circuit? Is it going to be Max Verstappen on a circuit where he doesn't have to worry too much about bumps and curves that have hampered him so much recently? Is it going to be a Lando Norris or a McLaren that have developed so strongly over the last few rounds? And can Leclerc or Sainz in that Ferrari, who also made massive improvements, can they really take this to Red Bull? We're about to find out.
Well, Lando Norris has the best Sector 2 and Sector 3 times of anybody so far. Carlos Sainz strongest in the first sector. Ferrari running upgrades actually as well on their cars. Charles Leclerc didn't have the full upgrade in free practice 1 and was struggling with general balance of his car, but he's now within 0.3 of a second of his teammate Carlos Sainz in free practice 2. Upgrades also for Red Bull, Aston Martin, RB, Sauber and Haas. Those not bringing upgrades this weekend. Mercedes, McLaren, Alpine and Williams, as Lance Stroll comes to the line and goes 11th.
So Harry, we've had the soft tyre runs now, the sort of qualifying simulation runs from the 2 Ferraris and Lando Norris. We know that Oscar Piastri's got a technical problem in his McLaren, and Sainz is quickest from Norris by just 0.03 of a second. But Verstappen is now starting his lap. He's just gone through the first sector line and he's got a purple sector. So let's see where he ends up. And the Mercedes drivers are just coming out too.
Max Verstappen, the rear wing flap opens to activate the drag reduction system, the DRS. Out through turns 9 into the braking zone of the left-hander of turn 10, widened a couple of years ago, and then that feeds you through almost a roller coaster ride of turns 11 and 12, a left-hander, then a right-hander, which arcs all the way around turn 13, and then the final corner, now just one sweeping right-hand corner rather than the old chicane that used to be there. Round the final corner, Verstappen fastest of anybody in the first and final sectors. It's third overall for the Dutchman.
He lost more than 0.3 in that middle sector alone. So that I don't know whether he had an issue because we didn't see the whole lap, but he lost a lot of time in the middle sector. He was faster than anyone in the first sector, faster than anyone in the third sector. The middle sector in that Red Bull let him down. So is that an area of the track that he's struggling with, or did he come across traffic or have an issue?
Fully blocked me my work. Can you tell me who was the driver racing booth? It was Tsunoda. Not surprised.
That's Zhou Guanyu in the Sauber there, not happy with how he felt he was blocked through the final sector by the RB of Yuki Tsunoda. And so Zhou on the radio there. Typical.
A bit of Sino-Japanese tension there, isn't there?
Oh, let's not go there. Tsunoda actually had a really rough FP1, and he was one of the cars actually that had a bit of a weird DRS issue, along with Valtteri Bottas, with the rear wing flipped back sort of almost too far of itself. So he's trying to sort that out during the session. Led to slight delays for both Tsunoda and Bottas. Zhou on that, he's now on an outlap, but he was 12th fastest. Valtteri Bottas up there in 6th at the moment. Zhou actually running a old chassis, the one he used up until Imola when they brought some upgrades and changed things, but things haven't been going too well for Zhou Guanyu, the Chinese racer, since then, with a run of sort of 15th, 16th, 15th places. In fact, Monaco, he was slowest of anybody and quite a way off the pace. So Sauber tried to sort out those problems for Zhou Guanyu. Both Sauber drivers trying to find a home for next year, with one seat already confirmed to that team in the hands of Nico Hülkenberg, who will move over from Haas. Hülkenberg back in the car now for free practice 2. He made way for the young British racer Oliver Bearman in FP1. And Hülkenberg currently 9th fastest. His teammate Magnussen just ahead in 8th.
So, good stuff from Lewis Hamilton in that Mercedes, currently top of the timesheets, only just 0.02 of a second quicker than the Ferrari of Carlos Sainz, but that's a good indication for Mercedes on a completely different circuit to the one last time out in Montreal, where they were also quick, that they've now got perhaps a package that works in more than one specific set of conditions, and that, if that's the case, will be really encouraging. Of course, it's only over one lap here. We're yet to see the longer run pace, and I'm sure Andrew will give us some insight into that a little bit later on, but that perhaps an encouraging sign for both Lewis Hamilton and Mercedes.
Certainly is. 29 minutes and 15, 14, 13 seconds remain. It is Hamilton fastest ahead of Sainz, Norris, Verstappen. Leclerc is 5th in front of the Alpine of Esteban Ocon. Then it's Bottas, Magnussen, Hülkenberg and Russell. Haven't seen a soft tyre run from George Russell yet, down in 10th. Then it's Alonso, Tsunoda, Ricciardo, Joe Stroll. The top 15. The two Williams, Albon and Sargent Liner Stern in 16th and 17th, ahead of Piastri, who is now back out on track on his first soft tyre run. Russell goes up to 6th on his soft tyres. Piastri currently down in 18th. He'll rocket up the order shortly. Gasly and Perez down in 19th and 20th. Let's see what Piastri has got over the line, and it's 6th fastest for the Australian in the McLaren, about 0.3 off of Lewis Hamilton, and his teammate is only half a tenth behind Lewis Hamilton, up in 3rd. We talked a lot and have been talking a lot about the driver market. Obviously, we're waiting for Carlos Sainz really to make a move in that respect, but Adrian Newey and his future is still undecided. The talk of the town and the momentum is a move to Ferrari because of the illustrious history, the emotion there, the chance to work with Lewis Hamilton. But and Andrew may well be able to correct me on this, I did see a story earlier in the week that Aston Martin arranged a private viewing for Adrian Newey of their factory. Is that a ploy by Aston Martin to try and sway Newey's mindset to join the Silverstone team for next year?
Well, we've known for a while that Aston Martin had made Newey an offer. In fact, I wrote about it at the time that we did the story about him leaving Red Bull. I don't think it's a particular surprise that they were showing around the factory. I'm sure Ferrari are showing around their factory as well, and McLaren are also interested in Newey, and I wouldn't be surprised if he's popped over from his home in near Ascot to the Woking factory, which is not very far away, and have a look around there too. I don't know where Newey's going to go. I think that of those three teams, Aston Martin is very much not the favourite. They're sort of last in line. Not everybody likes is particularly enamoured of the prospect of working with Lawrence Stroll. There is a particular appeal for Newey at Aston Martin in Fernando Alonso, who he's always said he regretted not having worked with yet. But of course the same applies at Ferrari with Lewis Hamilton. Personally, from what I'm told, I think it'll be between Ferrari and McLaren, and the decision is obviously there's the kudos of working for Ferrari. He's not done it before. He'd become even more of a legend than he already is if he can make Ferrari world champions. Hamilton and Leclerc is a very attractive driver lineup to be working with, in the way that Lance Stroll is not. Whereas McLaren, he's been at McLaren already, but it'd be a lot calmer environment for him. As I say, it's just down the road from his house. It would disrupt his personal life much less. Obviously, his wife has to be taken into account as well. Newey probably doesn't, he's 65 years old, he's got all the money in the world, he doesn't need any extra grief in his life, and obviously he would have to go and work in Italy some of the time if he was at Ferrari. So that's what Newey's weighing up, and as far as I'm aware, he's not made the decision yet.
Alpine not an option?
I'm sure they'd be desperate for him.
The chance to really build something from the ground up, that's the only way I see it.
I was just thinking how interesting it must be for Adrian Newey, at least, to be shown around all of those factories. How many other people? Well, first of all, I was thinking, how many other people have been around all of those different factories? And
I want a tour.
But then I was thinking, actually, Fernando Alonso has driven for all of those teams, so he has.
Certainly has, and that would be the draw, of course, of Aston Martin, the chance to work with Fernando Alonso. Of course, extended his contract with Aston Martin through to 2026 and potentially beyond earlier in the year, but we still wait with bated breath to see what Adrian Newey does. Of course, he's still contracted to Red Bull through until the beginning of next season, although it's a bit vague as to when he can actually get out of his Red Bull commitments. But well, we'll be keeping you across all of the developments there on 5 Live and of course on the BBC Sport website. Just under 24 minutes remain. Hamilton is still fastest of anybody, ahead of Sainz. Norris, Gasly's up there in 4th for Alpine, having put the soft tyres on. Then it's Verstappen in 5th, Leclerc, Piastri, Russell, Ocon, Bottas in 10th. The two Hasses are 11th and 12th. Magnussen ahead of Hulkenberg. Alonso ahead of Tsunoda in 13th and 14th. Then it's Ricciardo, Joe, Stroll, Albon, Sargent and Sergio Perez. Been in the pits for a little while, only done 8 laps, down in 20th. Hasn't been out on the soft compounder tyre, so I wonder if there is a little bit of an issue going on down on the Mexican side of the garage.
Yeah, it does appear that way. He is the only person not to have tried the soft tyre yet, so although seeing Sergio Perez that far down the order has not been that out of the ordinary in recent weeks, I do think today is a little bit different. I guess we've seen the best of all the soft tyres now, and it is Hamilton that tops the timesheets. We're now starting to get extended runs on these tyres to see what the longevity is like. This is a circuit, as Andrew said earlier, that is really quite tough on tyres, and even over one lap, particularly this is a factor in qualifying, you can, if you're not careful, take too much out of your tyres in the early part of the lap to leave you with not enough performance towards the end, particularly with the tyres on the left-hand side. It's very heavy on those. The last and final corner is a very long sweeping right-hander. It puts a lot of strain and builds up a lot of temperature in those left-hand side tyres. And if you've worked them too hard in the early part of the lap, you can start to suffer. So it's one of those tracks where you have to balance how much you take out of it in qualifying early in the lap to make sure you've got enough left at the end.
Yeah, this is a high degradation circuit, and certainly we're running it a little bit later than usual as well in the season, so temperatures are higher than normal. Air temperature 24.8 degrees, track temperature 42.6 degrees, about 50% humidity as well. And the grandstands are absolutely packed. Everybody enjoying Formula One cars out on track, but also the sun beating down in between the puffy white clouds and blue sky, a world away from the rain and grey that was covering the paddock and the track yesterday. And yeah, mixture of cars out on track. We spoke a lot and debated a lot about the Alpine problem in free practice 1, so I don't want to dredge that all up. But one of the interesting conversations as Sergio Perez is now back out on track, this time on the soft tyre, but one of the more interesting conversations I thought recently is now there seems to be a talking point around Renault, who effectively run Alpine, dropping their engine programme and Alpine effectively becoming a customer of another team. And this just feels like a really odd situation for a team that is steeped in history within Formula One. But also when you've got teams that are being denied entry, like Andretti, that come with General Motors, Cadillac, General Motors sort of backing them as an engine, as a power unit supplier, and they're being told no. It just seems like A, it doesn't add up, but B, could there also be an opportunity there?
Yeah, it's weird on so many fronts. I mean, I keep thinking about the fact that if this happens, if Alpine give up the chance to be a power unit supplier and therefore have to take a customer engine, let's say they take a Honda and become a customer of the Honda manufacturer, what you're doing is you're effectively saying, well, our engine's not good enough, we can't manage to be successful in Formula 1 with our own engine, and let's just say they then have some success over the next few years, but it's with a Honda in the back. What does that look like? What message does that say to the customers that you're trying to sell cars to, that yeah, you might now have won a race or be even world champions at some point, but it's an Alpine Honda, not just an Alpine. I mean, that's a very mixed message.
I'll come back to you on that, though, with the fact that it's an Alpine. They're selling Alpines, not Renaults, technically. And you look at McLaren Honda, McLaren Mercedes, McLaren Renault.
Yeah, it's true. I would say that's true, although it is a very different market they're selling cars into, in terms of you can't go and buy, most of us can't go and buy a McLaren car. You don't see many of them running around the road. So to have a customer engine from somebody like Mercedes, I think is slightly different.
You don't see many Alpines, and I know you can, but I can't afford an Alpine. So
you don't see that many, but I don't think that's because they're so exclusive that the world can't find them. I think they just can't buy them. I think it's just because they don't produce that many in this country. They're not big in this country, in the UK. I just think it's a slightly different problem. I do get what you're saying, and I appreciate that. But I think the idea of giving up your own engine in exchange for someone else's, in which you hope to then be successful, sort of says, well, I couldn't do it with my own, so I'm going to go and borrow someone else's, and that's why I'm now successful. Are you going to sell more cars that way? That's the reason they're in Formula One. They're to try and sell more cars. Are you selling more cars because you've only managed to be successful by bolting in a Honda in the back? I don't think so.
Well, their engine is down in terms of speed. They have a deficit to the other engine manufacturers involved in Formula One. They were even trying and lobbying for a bit of an engine freeze so they could catch up, essentially, but that was denied and thrown out. So they're clearly evaluating all options. Luca De Meo, the executive at Renault, basically has a Formula One team on his hands that I think has lacked any true identity over the last few years. I mean, if we go back 10 years, when they were Renault in that sort of iconic yellow livery almost, and then they became this weird sort of Lotus Renault amalgamation, and then they became Lotus, and then suddenly Renault were back in the game, but that didn't work, and then Alpine came in, and you even go back years before, and you had the iconic Renault with Fernando Alonso, go back even further than that. It just seems like, yes, this year has been particularly bad for them in terms of on-track performance and engineering staff being lost, but this has been coming for a little while.
Yeah. And they are one of few major automotive car manufacturers that are firmly planted in this sport. You can look at Mercedes, clearly. I'm discounting McLaren as a major manufacturer in terms of mass market cars. Look at Mercedes. They've had massive success, of course. You can even look at Honda, and so you go back a few years, they did have some success. When the team was Honda, they had some success, or certainly when it turned into Brawn. You can look at Ferrari, perennially successful in this sport over a long period of time. I think Alpine haven't managed to capitalise on what must have been an enormous investment over the last 10 or 15 years. I don't think they've planted themselves as a major player in this sport. It's been chaotic. Like you say, they feel a little bit lost, gone in all directions, even promoting lots of different brands. So from the outside at least, it feels like they haven't got a good return on their investment. They must see something on the inside that continues to justify spending this money. It's just getting harder and harder to understand what that is.
Well, at the moment, Gasly is up in 4th, Ocon down in 9th, and of course off the back of the double points finish in Canada as well. So it's not all doom and gloom down at Alpine, but certainly they'll be wanting more. They've got a driver lineup at the moment, which is a fairly sturdy lineup, in Esteban Ocon and Pierre Gasly, both race winners. Ocon's, well, in terms of performance, together as a relationship, chaos. But they're both good, solid drivers.
Yeah.
And we know Ocon's off. We don't know where. Gasly, he could be off. I can't see it, but his contract is up. Where do you see the driver lineup for Alpine going? Because if they've got great marketable drivers as well, that's going to help their cause.
Yeah, it's true, but they're running out of options to have really great marketable drivers. I mean, look, they're a French team. At the moment, they've got 2 French drivers. You'd think that's the sort of dream, and you're right, they are both talented guys. I can see Jack Doohan, who is their young driver, I can see him coming into that, but there are a number of names being linked to that vacant seat, at least the Ocon seat. We don't yet know what Gasly will do, but I think we sort of expect him to stay. I do think there's a growing wave running through Formula One that says young drivers are no longer quite the risk that we once saw them as. We've seen people like Behrman come in, do a great job. We've seen others do the same sort of thing. So I think it's swinging towards young drivers. And I think in 2025, we're probably likely to see the biggest influx of young drivers into Formula One than we've had for many, many years in one go.
Just an apology to Amit, who is quite the long-term BBC F1 listener and does have a bit of an affiliation with Alpine. We didn't give you the warning for the Alpine doom and gloom, and I am sorry about that.
Sorry, Amit.
But it's a conversation point, and one that, you know, we don't want to see Alpine where they are at the moment. We want as many top-flight manufacturers fighting it out at the sharp end, and Alpine are currently down in 8th position. They're only a few points ahead of Williams. They're about 21 points back from. Oh no, they're only 2 points back from Haas. So
yeah, because also you know, them doing well will encourage other manufacturers to look at this sport. You know, we've got Audi coming in over the next couple of years. Their success or otherwise will be a major factor in whether other manufacturers take a serious look at the sport. Because if Audi come in, for example, and start doing really well, other manufacturers might sit up and take notice. If Alpine can find themselves further up the grid and being competitive and being a major player, both in terms of, you know, from a marketing perspective and also the results on track, it will start to become more attractive to others, and that's what the sport needs to sustain itself. It needs the big players, i.e. the big manufacturers, both engine and automotive, to start really doing well and you know, stamping a mark on this sport. So I hope they can do it.
Speak of Audi, they come into the sport in 2026. They're taking over the Sauber team, and that's already moves are being made to put that in motion. The signing of Nico Hülkenberg, and they've recently just appointed a new performance director as well. And they've changed actually. I think it was Miami. They changed Valtteri Bottas's race engineer. So changes are being made there. One of the questions that I sort of keep coming back to is, they're coming in for the new power unit regulations that are changing for 2026. But is that the sole reason we've got Audi coming into Formula One? Because I get it as a bit of a marketing tool, but Audi's, it just seems like it feels a bit of a bizarre move for Audi, considering they've been so into the electric world and also have never been involved in Formula One before.
No, but perhaps that's partly the reason here, because Formula One is desperately trying to push this more sustainable agenda. One of the big factors in 2026's power unit regulations is the move to fully sustainable fuels and the development path that will then create. We're going to much more equally split power units between electric, so hybrid performance, and internal combustion engine. The internal combustion engine shrinking, the hybrid element becoming larger. That becomes more and more attractive to road car manufacturers, because that's the way the world is going. So the reason we're changing regulations, or a large part at least of these regulation changes, are to try and attract major manufacturers like Audi. Audi is at the moment the only success story off the back of that. I guess Honda are coming back in from the fringes, although they're sort of almost involved. They're coming back in as well as a result. So the changes, I guess, to some extent are working, in terms of the intention behind them is to attract more manufacturers. That's what they've done. So as I said before, I hope these manufacturers can be successful as a result of that.
Yeah, well, we'll see what Audi have got as they take over fully that Sauber team across 2025. They'll still be Sauber next year, and then they will become Audi from 2026 onwards, and it will be good to have a name like Audi in Formula One. Free practice 2 for the Spanish Grand Prix is what you're currently listening to, with 11 minutes and 54 seconds remain. You're listening to myself, Harry Benjamin, alongside the former F1 mechanic Mark Priestley and the BBC's F1 correspondent Andrew Benson. And don't forget, you could listen to our F1 coverage on your smart speaker now. All you have to do is ask BBC Sounds to play, for instance, Spanish Grand Prix Practice 2. Or whatever session we may be covering at the time. So a new way to enjoy Formula One on the BBC. It's Hamilton who is currently fastest on the soft compound tyre, a 1:13.2, 200ths ahead of Carlos Sainz. Then it's Lando Norris and Pierre Gasly. Verstappen, the top 5. Leclerc, Piastri, Russell, Ocon, Bottas, the top 10. The two Hasses are 11th and 12th in front of Perez, who did do a soft tyre run, but it's only enough for 13th at the moment. Alonso, 14th, ahead of Tsunoda, Ricciardo, Joe, Stroll, and the two Williams. 19th for Albon, 20th for Logan Sargent.
I think one thing that's just jumped out at me as being of interest is that Sergio Perez, although he's missed a large part of this session, being stuck in the garage with some kind of technical issue, has finally gone out with a soft tyre run. It's only been good enough for 13th, 8/10 off the time that Lewis Hamilton's been able to do on the same tyre. If that's a genuine measure of his one-run single-lap pace, that's not good enough. His teammate Verstappen, all right, he's only in 5th, but he's 2/10 off Hamilton at a similar time on track. So Perez still with a lot of work to do. He's got to start upping his game. We talked about it earlier. If Red Bull have hopes of hanging on to a Constructors' Championship at the end of the season, they need both of their drivers up there.
He'll also have a 3-place grid penalty for this weekend after his crash in Canada, and the car was quite badly damaged, but he still drove it back to the pits, and that was seen as a breaking of the rules of a car being fit and safe to drive. So they have now got a three grid place penalty as a result of that. So if Perez did indeed qualify at 13th, well, he'll be starting 3 places back, and that is the last thing he needs, Mark.
Well, Harry, I've just noticed the time. I can't take the tension any longer. I'm sure BBC F1's going crazy for it. It's time for Andrew Benson's Long Run Corner.
Long Run Corner with Andrew Benson.
You can go the distance, we'll find out in the long run, in the long run.
So we do have a bit of a problem with the timing screens at the moment, so I can't give you a definitive long run corner, unfortunately. Just seen Max Verstappen, by the way, go off at turn 1 without any damage. But there is some interesting data. So unfortunately, we can't compare Verstappen's times with the other top teams, because he's been on the medium tyre doing his soft tyre race simulation run, his race simulation run, whereas Ferrari and Mercedes and McLaren have all chosen the soft tyre, which is unusual for Barcelona. Anyway, so you've got Sainz was running at the same time as Norris on a set of softs, and the Ferrari was about a 10th of a second per lap quicker on average than McLaren was. Oscar Piastri was also out on the soft tyre. That's Lando Norris's teammate, but he's a second quicker than those two, so there must be some kind of offset going on there, whether it's power unit performance or maybe a fuel load. We don't have much Mercedes data. We just have 1 lap before the timing screens froze, but George Russell's first soft tyre lap was pretty much the same time as Sainz's and quicker than Norris's, so that would suggest basically that Ferrari, Mercedes and McLaren are all very evenly matched on long run pace, as they are in fact on short run pace, because there's only 55 thousandths of a second separating Hamilton in first from Norris in third, with Sainz in between them. What we don't have at the moment is a Verstappen read, although we do know that he's been struggling with understeer, and on 1 lap at least he was about a quarter of a second off, although it may be that he had a problem in the middle sector because he was unusually slow there, and there's no obvious reason why that would be the case.
Thank you very much, Andrew Benson, the BBC's F1 correspondent. So we could have a good fight on our hands, Mark, come Sunday and Saturday.
It's kind of what we wanted, wasn't it? We've all been sort of bigging up the chances of McLaren and Ferrari against what have been a dominant Red Bull over the last 2 rounds, but we keep kind of caveat it with, there was an odd set of circuits. You know, it's Monaco, very different to anything else. It was Montreal, very much about the sort of long straights but slow speed corners. This is very different, and we didn't know what we were going to find here, but early signs are that it is actually quite close, and the sort of steps forward we've seen from Ferrari and McLaren are genuine, and we might even be able to throw Mercedes into that mix. So yeah, I think a really interesting prospect ahead for the rest of this race weekend.
Certainly will be, with about 6.5 minutes left on the clock. And when we go off air, still plenty of sport to enjoy across BBC Radio 5 Live. Poland, Austria from 5 o'clock. The Euros coverage continues on 5 Live. And then from 7 o'clock, it's Netherlands taking on France. Over on 5 Sports Extra a little bit later on in the evening from 7:45. If rugby is your tipple, Rugby League action, Leeds Rhinos are in action taking on the Lee Leopards. That's from 7:45 this evening on 5 Sports Extra. But right now you are listening to Free Practice 2 ahead of the Spanish Grand Prix, where Lewis Hamilton is currently fastest, but we've crunched the data and we think it's a pretty even match at the moment between Ferrari, Mercedes and McLaren, but we don't quite have all the data available on what Max Verstappen and Red Bull's movements are, although he has been struggling with general all-round control of his car since Free Practice 1. Not quite happy with the state of it at the moment. He's currently down in 5th, about 2/10 off Lewis Hamilton's pace at the moment. It was a good lap from Pierre Gasly, who's up in 4th. It's soft. I know it's soft tyre running, it's practice. That's still a solid lap from the Alpine driver.
Yeah, it is, because essentially what the timing sheets say right now is the order that everybody was able to achieve at the time they set it on the softest tyre. So it's effectively a pre-run of qualifying. It's everybody trying to get the very best over one lap of their car. Yes, there were slight caveats. You can say that some people might have come across traffic, some people did their runs at slightly different times, but Gasly right up there in 4th, just under 2/10 off the lead time of Hamilton. So that's a genuine show of pace from that car. So there is some performance in that Alpine car. Their problem is they haven't been able to extract that on a consistent basis, and certainly not when it comes to race day.
No, Pierre Gasly though, off the back of his and Alpine's best result of the season so far in Canada, 9th. 2 points to his name there, so he's now got 3 overall, down in 15th in the Drivers' Championship. This is the sound of Lando Norris making his way uphill towards the fast right-hander of turn 9. Oh, listen to that.
I hit the floor pretty hard. Okay, understood.
Yeah, that was the sound of the floor scraping along the green Astro. There's a little ridge there as well when you run a little bit out wide, coming through that fast right-hander of turn 9, and even kicking up a bit of gravel as well.
When you see the intricacy of these aerodynamic parts, particularly the floor, if you ever get to see a glimpse of the underside of a Formula One car, there are so many really kind of intricate pieces. They're actually beautiful works of art. So it's the T1 crunching over a curve and being battered, and the sound you can hear of all that gravel being thrown up underneath. I always feel sorry for the poor guy who designed the thing.
Front under rotation sucks.
Was Yuki Tsunoda with some very technical feedback there. So Tsunoda down in 15th was pretty much at the back during Free Practice 1. Had a DRS issue as well, but the RBs aren't too comfortable out there at the moment. Ricciardo just behind him in 16th.
What he's talking about, it's one of these sort of colloquialisms in Formula One. I've never really understood why we say this. Under rotation, he's talking about under rotation sucks. What he actually means is the tyres locking up. But Formula One drivers tend to use under rotation, as in the tyre's not rotating enough, or it's locked up. Why would you say it's locked up?
Yeah, that everyone knows where you stand with a locked up tyre.
Under rotation, such a strange term for that. But we all use it, and everyone in Formula One tends to use it, but it's just the tyre locked up.
Well, giving some feedback then to the engineers, Yuki Tsunoda off the back of securing his future for another year at least, with an option to go one more on top of that with the RB team. And there was interest from multiple teams for Yuki Tsunoda's services for next season, having gotten the better so far of Daniel Ricciardo and had his best season so far in Formula One with 6-point scoring finishes so far to his name, and was on a run up until Canada of 4 consecutive points scoring finishes, and would have scored points in Canada had he not made a bit of a mistake on in the final few laps and spun his RB round. Lucky not to be collected by the Haas of Nico Hülkenberg in that respect, so no big damage done to Tsunoda on that occasion. But so far RB with upgrades this weekend with to the floor, the bodywork, the rear wing and the engine cover, still working through their programme, down in 15th and 16th at the moment. with less than 2 minutes remaining on the clock.
So I think the teams that are going to probably look most favourably on their Fridays are certainly going to be Mercedes, because there was a huge question mark over whether they could carry the performance from Canada through onto what is a very different circuit, like we said. And it seems, at least from the early signs, they're managing to do that. Hamilton does top the timesheets. That's not the whole picture, but they have got a car that they seemingly have changed or found a direction in which they know they need to proceed, and are able to now be a little more confident about bringing upgrades and updates, developing the direction they design components for it. So good signs for Mercedes. I think they'll look on this Friday as a really positive start. First at the moment for Hamilton, 8th for George Russell, but a promising sign. I think Ferrari will be slightly frustrated in terms of Charles Leclerc hasn't seemed to be totally comfortable. Sainz looking like the better of the two Ferrari drivers over the course of Friday. It's Leclerc, who they really would love to see becoming more and more comfortable, becoming at one with that car and being able to deliver the performances. But he is the future of this organisation and this team. And I think from a Red Bull point of view, Verstappen currently sitting in 5th, and we see this caveat, it's only Friday, there's a lot more of this weekend to come, but Verstappen not seeming quite as comfortable as we might have got used to him in the early part of the season. We can look at the last couple of rounds, these sort of anomalies of racetracks, and say, well, look, he hasn't been comfortable there, but it's been a very specific thing that's upset their car. Here we are at a much more traditional type of circuit. He still doesn't seem very comfortable yet.
No, but as you say, still early stages. Joe Granu in the Sauber called it an early day. Already out of the car, putting his helmet away, balaclava off. Joe down in 17th, a session that has seen the Chinese driver struggle so far. Final laps coming through. Lewis Hamilton rounds the final corner, the right-hander of turn 14, which brings you on to the start-finish straight, where you can get up to maximum speed around here, about 325 kilometres per hour, as he hits the brakes and will top the session. Lewis Hamilton on top in free practice 2 for Mercedes, ahead of Carlos Sainz. Lando Norris is 3rd. Gasly finishes in 4th, ahead of Verstappen. Then it's Leclerc, Piastri, Russell takes the checkered flag in 8th, with Ocon and Bottas rounding out the top 10. Then it's the two Hasses, Magnussen ahead of Hulkenberg. Perez only managing 13th in the end, in front of Alonso. Tsunoda was 15th in front of his teammate Ricciardo. Joe, Stroll, and the two Williams drivers, Albon ahead of Logan Sargeant, 19th and 20th. So as you say, Mark, this seems like it's a positive sign for not only Mercedes and Lewis Hamilton, but for us as the punter watching. We haven't seen everything that Verstappen and Red Bull have got just yet, but off of free practice 1 and 2, feels like there's a bit of hope that we're going to have a good fight on our hands.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, that's even more positive, because there was a risk, or a potential risk, that what we might default back to here is that early season Verstappen dominance. There was some talk that, we're coming back to a circuit that's very much about aerodynamics. That's definitely one of the major strengths of that Red Bull car, where we're going to see Verstappen fall back into disappearing up the road and dominating the weekend. So far, it looks like that hasn't happened. It's not to say that it can't happen yet. There's a lot of work that'll happen overnight on Friday and again into Saturday morning before we get to the sharp end of the weekend.
All right, well, that brings to an end our coverage of Friday in Barcelona. My thanks to Mark Priestley, to Andrew Benson, to our excellent production team who are always on the ball. These are the times you'll need for tomorrow. FP3 online only on the BBC Sport website and app will be on air from 11:25 in the morning, and qualifying again online only on the BBC Sport website and app will be on air from 5 to 3 in the afternoon. Do hope you can join us then. I've been Harry Benjamin, and this has been an IMG production for BBC Radio 5 Live.